Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Lola Casal Sanchez, and I am one of the members of the European Network EuroAgeism. It's really a pleasure for me and for all my colleagues to be here today to introduce you the topic of ageism in the workforce and in the industry. Before starting, it would be always good to have some of key elements for the housekeeping. We will appreciate if each of you can write the email, the names, your full name, so we will know who you are connected today. All your microphones and all your cameras are going to be off. However, you have the questions and answer box just there open to each of you to send any comment, to make any questions, to give any feedback that you consider. And a last point is that this webinar is going to be recorded. So please don't share any kind of personal data or any information that you want to keep it private. After this webinar is going to finish, we are going to upload it on the Robert Gordon University website. So if you need to leave early or if you join us a little bit late, it's going to be available for all of you. And now we can really start. And the first things that I would like to do is I would like to introduce you EuroAgeism. EuroAgeism is an European funded international network shaped by researchers, policymakers, and social and healthcare professionals from all around the world, and we come from really different professional backgrounds. We are working together for getting one objective. We want to decrease ageism and discrimination based on age in everyday life, in clinical and in social practices. To achieve this, we are working on 15 research projects all across Europe. And we pursue three main objectives with our research projects. We want to explore ways to improve the active participation of older adults in the workforce. We also want to address ageism in relation to access to goods and services. And we also want to promote an age-friendly society which helps older adults to realize their full potential. Europe has the largest percentage of older adults worldwide. And unfortunately, discrimination based on age is a transversal element in our daily life. So our 15 research projects want to create a coherent and holistic research agenda that is greater the sum than of these products. We will really want to thank Robert Gordon University for this opportunity to introduce you about ageism in the workforce and in the industry. We really believed that the right to work should be granted regardless our of on age chronological age. Ageist stereotypes and discrimination should be eliminated to ensure that older people stay in the workforce, re-enter the workforce, learn and train throughout their whole life. I have the pleasure today to be together with four of my colleagues. They are going to introduce you different topics. The first of my colleague who is going to talk is Stefan Hope, and he is going to introduce you to the topic of ageism and ageism in the workforce and in the industry. Then my colleague Federica Previtali and Maria Varlamova are going to introduce you to the ageism in the labor market, what, who, where, when, and why. And finally, my colleague Itai Mannheim is going to talk about implication of technological ageism on workers, organizations, and customers. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here. And now we just start with my colleague Stefan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lola, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this webinar. In my presentation today, I will provide an overview of the concept of ageism and age discrimination, and I will point out how ageism and age discrimination harm older workers and older customers, and how this has a negative impact on national economies, businesses, and organizations. So let's start with the question, what is ageism? Typically, ageism is defined as stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination against people because of their age. And while in our webinar today, we will predominantly talk about ageism against older persons, it is important to notice that it can also target younger people and sometimes also people in their middle years. Looking more closely at the tripartite of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, we can say that stereotypes are what we think about certain life phases or what we think about people because they are of a certain age. While the term prejudice refers to the typically negative feelings that are connected to these thoughts. Discrimination, in turn, is the behavioral element of ageism. That is, how we act towards and treat people because of their age. So where does ageism stem from? Due to the increased research on ageism and age discrimination in the last decade, today many causes and drivers of ageism are known. Some of them are of psychological origins, others are of sociological nature. I will now only focus on some of those that are located on a societal level. So first, there are of course cultural factors that foster ageism. For example, certain ideals of beauty that culturally devalue certain signs of aging, like wrinkles. Furthermore, there are legal factors, such as certain age limits that distribute rights and duties on the basis of chronological age and thereby exclude certain people from certain rights because they are too young or too old. Then there are also political factors that can drive ageism. For example, if in the political debate, older people are not seen and described as holders of rights, but primarily addressed as welfare recipients and therefore seen as a burden to society. Finally, there are also economic rationalities that can contribute to ageism. For example, the fact that cost reduction, and especially personal cost reduction, is often considered the most important business factor, even more so than an increase in productivity. This in turn makes it often more difficult for older workers to find a job because often salaries, justifiably, rise with age. Let's next have a look on how ageism affects older workers and customers. At the labor market, ageism can manifest itself in very different ways and in very different relationships. And while it has been typically thought of as a form of discrimination directed from employers and supervisors against older workers, for example, by discriminating against older workers in job promotions or training opportunities, age discrimination can also be directed by colleagues against their older co-workers. Examples of ageism among colleagues are if older co-workers are not invited to, let's say, informal gatherings because these gatherings are only for the under 40s, or if younger staff members are less comfortable working with their older colleagues and therefore not include them in the working process in an equal way. Recent research from the US has shown that age discrimination is indeed a widespread problem on the labor market. According to a study from 2020, 2/3 of the Americans aged 50 plus have already experienced age discrimination in the labor market. Yet in the industry, age discrimination can not only be directed against older workers, but also against older customers and clients. Here, age discrimination can, for example, manifest when advertising or marketing campaigns do not portray older people at all, or if older people are predominantly portrayed as passive, frail, inactive. So when older people are mainly shown as sitting on park benches, walking with Zimmer frames, or if they are displayed mainly in relation with healthcare and medical products. A striking research finding here comes from Japan, where only 6% of all advertisements that feature human actors actually show people aged 65 plus. And that is although this group makes up over 20% of the whole population of Japan. This means that a large group in society, which also has a great deal of purchasing power, is hardly visible in advertisement. Furthermore, age discrimination against older customers can occur when older people are not included in the development of technological products, specifically targeted at them, or if the diversity among older people is not adequately considered when when products are designed with an age-related purpose. But what is the impact of ageism? As research has repeatedly shown us, ageism and age discrimination has an immense social and economic cost. Contemporary analysis and calculations show that age discrimination in the labor market has cost the US around 1% of their gross domestic product in 2018, which is an equivalent to around $815 billion. This already enormous figure of $815 billion could, according to the same calculations, even increase in the future as the proportion of older people that is available to the labor market and participates at the labor market will increase. However, age discrimination against older workers does not only harm national economies. In addition, it also has a negative effect on, for example, families where transfer payments from grandparents or parents to children are missing, or the exclusion from the labor market reduces the inheritance because due to the loss of a job, pension income is reduced and outstanding loans cannot be paid off in full. Furthermore, ageism has a measurable negative effect on subjective and objective health and well-being, and this, of course, places a burden on national health systems. In a similar manner, ageism against older customers can have high follow-up costs. EU calculations estimate that in 2025, the age group 50 plus will account for 45% of all private consumer spendings, and that much of this spending is and will be financed by private wealth. Consequently, older people are a large and important customer group, but also one that is highly diverse in its social, cultural, and economic composition. Therefore, if companies today want to be successful on the so-called silver market, this diversity must be taken into account, especially because research increasingly shows us that discriminatory marketing strategies can damage the image of a company and its products, and that the stereotypical and homogenizing product design and development can have a negative impact on a successful sale of products. So let's now come to the conclusion of my presentation. Ageism and age discrimination affects us all. They affect us because people of all ages can be victims and because we all have normative ideas about what people of a certain age are like, how they behave, what they do, what they can do, what they should and what they shouldn't do. Ageism therefore affects us individually and personally, but it also has a negative impact on the societies that we live in. Not only does ageism contribute to the growing number of older workers facing major barriers in the labor market and when looking for a job, but it also means that national economies are generating less wealth than they could. But it's not only in terms of work that older people are an important group whose contribution to society is valuable. It is also more important than ever for organizations and companies to understand that the large group of the customer of their products is probably age 50 plus. And therefore, it is important for private companies to recognize that within this population, there are huge differences. So if one wants to be successful on this so-called silver market, it is essential to recognize and specifically address this diversity. Hence, we can summarize that ageism and age discrimination have a negative impact on the wealth of society and also negative impact on the balance and profits on private companies and organizations. It is therefore important to increase efforts to combat discrimination against older workers, for example, through the development and strengthening of equal treatment bodies, but it's equally important to raise awareness for ageism and age discrimination among employers, managers, product developers, and sales managers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for introducing us to the topic. Definitely is huge, the impact of ageism in the industry and in the workforce. Thank you very much. And now our next speakers are my colleagues Federica Previtali and Maria Barlamova. They are going to provide us examples of discrimination in the labor market, and their presentation is called Ageism in the Labor Market: What, Who, Where, When, Why, and How. Thank you very much.
Much, Lola, for the nice introduction. Hi, everybody, and thanks for being here with us. I am Federica Previtali, and I am a doctoral researcher in Tampere University in social psychology and part of the EuroAgeism network. And today I will present together with my colleague Maria Barlamova, who is a doctoral researcher in Jagiellonian University in Poland. We will address the topic of ageism in the labor market and try to answer to these 6 basic questions. So what is ageism? Who is impacted? Where does it show? When does it display? Why do we need to care? And how it is researched and how we can address it. So I'll start from the why. And Maria will talk more about why we need to talk about ageism and why it is important. Now I will just say why it is the right time to talk about ageism in the labor market. We might think that there are like bigger social issues out there in this moment. Of course, we think that there is a pandemic going on for more than a year now. But we say that now it is the right moment to talk about ageism in the labor market, because COVID-19 pandemic actually exacerbated the already existing inequality based on age that we also see in the workforce. So it is the right time for employees and employers to rethink processes that were ageist in order to create a better world of work for the future and promote a more inclusive and diverse workplace. And here you see what is the impact in this green graph of COVID-19 on the labor market. And we can think, when we think about ageism, for example, at layoff of older workers because of the closing of many businesses, or for example, the difficulty of younger workers in entering the workplace and workforce because of the lockdown and its impact in the economies. But let's go now to the where. Where does ageism manifest in the labor market? Here we talk about 3 main levels, and we want to point out that, of course, these levels are interconnected and there are many nuances that can add to this level. But for simplicity of information now, I will just address this. And let's start from the institutional, then go interpersonal and intrapersonal. So we will go top down. What is institutional ageism? It is when institution creates policies with an age barrier in themselves. So when institutions use age to discriminate in decision-making regarding their policies. When we talk about labor market, we can think of statutory retirement age. Is where our worker need to leave his work, so go on retirement, because he reached a certain chronological age, he or she reach a certain chronological age. So it's like 60 or 65. And this type of policy reinforce a norm that when we reach a certain chronological age, we kind of lose our value, our economic, our social values as worker, and we are suddenly less worthy. So just because we are a bit older, but it can go in the right opposite direction when we think about the career. There is institutional ageism also in recruitment, when, for example, companies set a minimum or a maximum age for a job position. This is ageist, and this is actually illegal, for example, in European Union, because the European Union banned age discrimination in the labor market since the 2000s. So we also have like legal instruments to address institutional ageism. When we think about interpersonal, we think about how we interact with each other. So among individuals, it is me with my colleague on the next desk. It is me with my supervisor, me with my supervisee, if I am a manager, or yet again in recruitment, so job applicants and recruiters and interviewers. Interpersonal ageism is based on age stereotypes. So it's when we act, feel, and think, as Stefan said, on the basis of the age of the person we are interacting with. So when we hold expectation just on the basis of age of another person. This is when we think that someone is too old to apply for a job, too young to ask for a promotion, and so forth. And it can also display in kind of like maybe covert element, for example, jokes, but these type of things reinforce some type of age stereotypes and some type of norms also within our workplace. And the more we reinforce them, the more we learn them, and the more we think they are true, and the more we internalize them. And this is the intrapersonal level. So when we think about ourselves, when we talk to ourselves in the mirror and we think, I am too old to apply for that job, I am too young to ask for that promotion, we internalize age stereotypes throughout our life, and we play out them, especially the older we get. And we also then have a negative conception about our own aging. And Stefan has already said that this is a huge impact on our own health, and for example, at work, in our own work engagement. So that's also why we need to take care of it on our own self, and starting from ourselves. We wanted just briefly talk about how we can research this. So how do we know all these things that we are now talking about? There has been a lot of research done, especially in the latest year, about ageism, especially in the labor market. Of course, this has been some kind of answer to a call by institutions and governments when they realized that in Europe and in Western countries, actually all over the world, population is aging. So there was a need of increasing retirement age. There was a need of retaining older workers. So people have started focusing on also aging within companies and within the labor market. There are many ways that you can research ageism. And of course, there varies in order to, according to what you want to know and what you want to focus about. They can be like collection of data through survey. They can be interviews, focus group. And I think if you are interested in, for example, learning more, if you are an employer, if you're an employee, and you want to address this topic in your company, you might want to think about these type of methods to actually look inside your company and maybe contact us or contact your fellow university next door and ask to have a research done in your workplace regarding this topic. And my last slide will talk about the what. I have already talked a bit about the stereotypes. Stereotypes is when we act on the basis of expectation and beliefs regarding some other people category. So it can be age, it can be gender, it can be nationality, religion, and so forth. And of course, these stereotypes sum up to each other. So we act on the basis of someone else's age, someone else's gender, and we act towards them in a stereotypical way that do not acknowledge their diversity, their individuals. And there has been a review in 2009 that listed the most common stereotype, which can be negative, but which can also be positive regarding older workers and younger workers. And I just want to point out that there has just been released a report by the UN just last month, and it actually listed the same stereotype. So we can see that these are quite permanent, these are stable in the labor market. But we also want to point out that they are not true. They are not based on truth. Ageism is not based on knowledge or like facts, but it uses some kind of like biases and norms and shortcuts to judge workers and our colleagues and so forth. And one of the most common is, for example, that with age decreases productivity. A lot of research shows that this is not true. Actually, older workers can be even more productive than younger workers, especially when it comes to, for example, more complex tasks. And now I will give the floor to my colleague, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Federica. And next slide, please. Federica introduced you very nicely to the topic about the levels where ageism can manifest, but let's closely look into the labor market and when ageism turns up here. Firstly, it can be seen already during the recruitment processes, both on advertising and on hiring etaps. As Federica pointed out, the current legal provision and policy framework prohibits direct discrimination. So it's hardly that you will see an advertisement stating that we are not wanting candidates aged 55 plus. In the majority of cases, several countries still do it, although it's illegal. But this discrimination in the advertisement can be implicit. Company can be looking for a new member to the young, dynamic team, or they can be looking for an early stage researcher, early stage career member, and that's how they implicitly discriminate people who are chronologically more old than other candidates. Then on hiring procedures, people can be just listed off because of their age, saying that their CV is just too long. They're somehow overqualified for that job position, which is also not true and is just about age stereotypes. Older people in older countries seem to receive less training and development than middle-aged and younger colleagues. And all the surveys show that something like from 5 to 12% of less frequent participation in training and the development occurs in the older age group, depends on how it is defined. Then several countries and several companies still have this mandatory retirement age, meaning when you turn 65, 60, or any other arbitrary chronological number, you're expected to leave the country. Sometimes it's in the legislation, sometimes it's just in the culture, but people are expected to retire just on the basis of their chronological age, disregarding of their skills, of their knowledge, of their experience, of the input they can bring and brings to the companies. And the last layer when ageism can manifest is age management, or in the majority of cases is the absence of age management. When the country does nothing to provide the diversity age teams, to make their work environment acceptable, accessible, and adaptable for all potentials and all requests of the older workers. Next slide, please. Federica, next slide, please. Thank you so much. But why do we actually need to combat ageism? Perhaps it's worth leaving things as they are and just wait until the situation solves itself. We have an opposite opinion. Ageism should be addressed, and Stefan started talking about it, because the benefits of addressing ageism in the labor market lies in the very different levels. For example, on the individual level, it will help employees to preserve their mental and cognitive well-being, to preserve their social network and the sense of meaning of life. It can even reduce mortality. But the last and not least, it also provides the financial security, because not all the workers can just afford going to the retirement at the stated age. On the level of the company, it improves productivity. It helps the company to benefit from the complementary knowledge and skills that diverse age teams can give to the company. It helps the company to prevent the workforce shortage, both due to population aging, but also to migration and other labor market fluctuations. It helps to avoid such unpleasant in the labor market things like presenteeism and absenteeism, and to make the image and the reputation of the company grow stronger and better. The preservance of the older worker also helps companies to benefit from the silver economy, both from the knowledge perspective, as older workers have this knowledge about what the older population and clients may require, but also from the practical perspective, as many surveys show that all the clients prefer to receive services and products from their age group. So the in-group perspective will work. Also, the companies would really benefit from the less turnover of the staff, as it was proved that older workers do stay longer and can provide companies with lots and lots of benefits. Next slide, please. So, how can we address ageism? First to say, ageism is a very holistic notion and it should be addressed in a holistic, lifelong perspective. But we can look into 5 levels just to know where to start. Let's start from the individual level. What can each of us do? And here the main thing would be awareness. Awareness of what we say, or how we act, and what we do. For myself, I have a small tip. When I'm not sure whether I say something ageist or whether my joke is ageist, I just replace the age with gender. In the 21st century, where everyone is very aware of the gender problem and of sexism, so I just replace age with woman, and I'm thinking to myself whether the phrase "I'm too much woman to participate in this training" sounds right. Definitely not. On that phrase, you just feel like, no, it's not right. I need to fight for my rights. It means that age is also not right there, but we are just more aware of the gender sensitive problems that we are aware about age sensitive problems. But we want to reach that level when ageist jokes also wouldn't be so abnormal like gender jokes now. So on the individual level, it's making sure you do not have self-ageism and you do not also express ageism towards others. On the company level, a lot of efforts can be done, but mostly in the dimensions of age management practices, in job recruitment, in lifelong learning, in career development, in providing flexible working practices, in health protection, redeployment, just to make sure that we waive age limits in our job advertisement, both explicit and implicit. We introduce the mechanisms of blind interviews and application forms to make sure that the internal micro-level biases of our HR managers do not have bad consequences on our selection of the interviews that we are going to have later. And it's also making sure that we know about public support programs with wage subsidies, wage settling grants that can help us to have more age diverse staff in our company. In lifelong learning, just to make sure that we have the continual evaluation and monitoring of the needs of our workers disregarding their age, that we benefit from in-group learning, and that we provide some effort to motivate our workers to participate in the proposed training opportunities disregarding of their age, gender, whatever. It's also about providing opportunities to progress in their careers, lifelong career development, disregarding of their age, and it's not about hierarchical progress. It can also be a redeployment and just moving to the job positions that fit employers better. It's introducing flexible working opportunities, and here it's not only older workers who would benefit from it. In general, from age management, not only older workers benefit, but the whole company and many different social categories. It's providing paid care leaves, partial retirement opportunities, and just part-time working. On the branch level, we can set standards for age-sensitive policy measures, introduce best examples, and provide consultancy to make sure that no one is left behind and that the field and the branch is moving into the right direction. On the national and governmental level, the main thing is a normative framework. So to make sure that the older people have their right to work as the other adults. So it's anti-discrimination legislation, it's promotion of age-sensitive human resource practices, and it's education. Education starting from schools and kindergartens by posting positive images of older people into the nation's mind. And nonprofit and intergovernmental organizations plays a very important role here because usually they're the closest to end users and they know the field the better. And all the measures, all the policies are really very field specific, country specific, culture specific. And usually it's nonprofit and intergovernment organizations who know these best examples, best case scenarios, how we can really benefit what works and what does not work in the concrete environment. Next slide, please. So what can we do? We can start from yourself and check on ourselves whether we are ageist or not. The last report of WHO says that every second person in the Europe is ageist. So someone from me and Federica perhaps is, we are too. We can start a conversation in our family, in our community, in our company. We can access our practices, how we do things every day. And we should ask our employees, our co-workers, our colleagues, and listen to them. Because each organization, each community are really different. And policies that we implement can be effective only if we take this context into consideration. And we should introduce training, both for our HR managers, for our employees, but also for our students, school children, and even starting from the kindergarten to show that everyone has a right to work and people do not have this best before date. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. Absolutely interested. And I really like to see how much diverse we are and how much impact we can make regarding without considering our age. And last but not least, I have the pleasure to introduce you to my colleague Itai Mahame, who is going to introduce you to the implication of technological ageism on workers, organization, and customers. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Lola, and thank you very much to my colleagues Stefan, Federica, and Maria for already giving the introduction on what is ageism and how it manifests in the workforce. And I'm gonna, with a little time left, try to focus specifically on the subject of technology, which I think during COVID has appeared to be very relevant for the working environment, the workforce, but not only for workers, but also for customers, consumers, and so on. And this is also what's allowing us to do this webinar. I'm also a PhD student, part of this ITN, and I'm situated in the Netherlands in the Fontys University of Applied Science and in Tilburg University. So I will start by saying that when we think about technology, we are thinking about innovation and things that are new, and relatively it's associated with being young as well. So on the contrary, older adults are many times highly stereotyped in relation to digital technology, just by using even the word old comparing to new technology. But older adults are many times associated as non-users, lagging behind, unable to learn new technologies. And again, inside we'll talk about in a moment, inside the organization, the notion of who is old can start as early sometimes as 40. But also when we think about people who retire and the association with digital technology is many times that older adults are also frail and more dependent and unable to use new technologies. And like also Stefan and Federica and Maria suggested, there are several levels in which we can see such ageism, and also when it's specifically in the context of technology. And I want to also suggest that when we talk about how digital technology is used or adopted, there are different levels that we can see this influence. And the higher hierarchy level is in the macro level, or the design or policy level. So what digital technologies are designed and how they are designed can be affected by stereotypes about age and by ageism. And the policy itself can push certain technologies ahead, but it can also shape certain regulation and certain organizational practices. The second level is in the meso level, or the social environment, or the organizational environment. It relates to interpersonal relationships within the organization. And the last level is the individual level, and it's also how we as individuals learn stereotypes about age in relation to technology. So for example, I'm too old for these new technologies. It's also a stereotype that is internalized and can be used by the individual and affect how they use or don't use digital technology. So talking now about the second layer, which is the ageism within the organization, the meso level. I said before that who is considered old in an organization can differ also according to the type of organization. So in a techie organization or a high-tech or startup organization, sometimes people who are 40 are already considered old. And we know that there is a problem for programmers, for example, reaching a certain age to find a new job. And that can start as early as 40, which is quite far from retirement age. But also in non-technological organizations, as our whole environment is highly digitalizing, we see that workers might be left behind in this highly digitalizing society. And this also implies that intergenerational interactions within organizations surrounding how we communicate, if it's digitally, for example, during COVID, when most of the work is online, regarding implementation of new technologies in the organizational environment. It relates also to training. For example, as example also given before, do we put the effort and the time and the money to train older workers into using new technologies? And again, who is an older worker, and from what age do we stop suggesting training? And is that by itself okay not to suggest training because of a worker's age? Technology and ageism in technology, of course, can have intersections with gender. It can, of course, have intersections also with other elements such as ethnicity or education and other elements. But we also know that men and women react differently to stereotypes about age and technology. And for example, there is one study showing that women with higher or more negative self-stereotypes about age use less digital technologies, whereas for men, the experience of discrimination leads to lower use of certain digital technologies. So there are also gender differences, and this is also something to take into account. There's also an example of the perception of older adults themselves, and this is an example for focus groups we did with older adults who have just retired. And these are older adults who, most of them were actually in technological organizations or positions that were using technology. But they were talking also about the perception of how they feel in intergenerational context. So they were saying that we feel that we are trying to close the gaps. But I think people who look at us, the generation below us, I think there's a bigger gap there because their objective or subjective perception is that we are still in the age of the wagon. So again, although some older adults and actually the majority of older adults in the workforce use digital technologies, there's sometimes the perception that they cannot or do not want to learn or use new technologies. When we think about the more macro level of what is designed and what is pushed forward in relation to age, regardless of the general developments in technology that are affecting the organizations, there's also a fixation of the age tech markets. So those are technologies that are specifically targeting older adults after retirement age. And the fixation of this age tech market, as we can see in this visualized map of companies that are trying to develop these kind of technologies, is that there is a fixation on care and healthcare. And this raises the question of, first of all, is this the essence of what older adults want and need? And do all older adults actually need technologies that can serve care and healthcare needs? So the thing is that the way technologies are designed can be influenced by ageism and stereotypes. And this, first of all, can imply what is designed. So mainly focusing on care and healthcare technologies, whereas perhaps older adults would also want technologies that relate to leisure and fun and social communication. But it can also affect how they are designed, not only what is designed. And in the design process, the manner in which older adults are involved can influence how these technologies are designed and what is designed. But it can also be influenced by misconceptions that perhaps people in the third age can have nothing to give in early stages of development. And we often see that many technologies that are developed, even if they are developed with older adults in the design process, might only involve them in later stages of the design, when actually changing something in the prototype or in the final product is very minimal. Another example of how ageism in relation to technology can influence older users or older customers relates to technological services. And because, as I was stating, many age tech technologies are focusing on care and healthcare, an interesting example is to look at healthcare professionals that in a way are in the forefront of using digital technologies with older adults. And in one study that we did that we focused on the attitudes of healthcare professionals, we tried to assess what are their attitudes about how older adults can use technology. And we manipulated also the age that they were presented. And we saw that healthcare professionals had relatively negative attitudes about the abilities of older adults to use these technologies. And more so when we manipulated the age, for example, presenting that the customer is young comparing to old, we saw a very dramatic difference in their attitudes about using this technology with the target population. And this raises the question, if many technologies can benefit older users, older adults, but the people who are supposed to use it with older adults don't think they can use it with them, it raises the question, are they actually used? And maybe this is actually the barrier to use these digital technologies, and rather not the abilities of older adults. So breaking off with this topic, what can be done? And this, you might find that this resembles also to some of the things that were said before. First of all, awareness raising and knowledge. And this mainly relates within the organization. Awareness raising that older workers also have high technological abilities and they can learn to use. And knowledge, for example, that if we look at most European countries, people below retirement age, almost the majority, almost 100% use internet, smartphones, new technologies, and are willing to learn them. But this also takes us to training and empowerment. And this relates also to older workers that might have as well internalized stereotypes about age and their abilities to use technology, but also relates to equal opportunity to receive training in using technology. And this also highlights the role of intergenerational communication. And whereas younger workers might have the ability to assist older workers to learn, older workers in turn might have the ability to influence their experience on younger workers. And finally, also on the level of design of technologies, new technologies and new services that are based on technologies, we suggest to look at design that it should be inclusive and rather viewed as a partnership with older adults. There's just so much that we can put in one presentation, so I want to suggest that if you want to deepen into this topic a bit more, you can find more information on our website. And this is just one example of a policy brief that we have written lately on policy measures to address ageism and digital technology. But generally on our website, you can find links to many of our research activities, also in the workforce, but also in other fields. And we highly recommend that you find your way there if you're interested. And with that, I think we're finishing the presentations, and I'm bringing back the stage to Lola to guide our discussion if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Itai, and thank you very much, Maria, Federica, and Stefan. I think that you have done a really nice introduction to the topic ageism in the workforce and in the industry. But I don't want to extend myself more because we already have a couple of questions and we don't have too much time. Nevertheless, if you have questions, go to our website and there we will be more than happy to reply to each of you. Someone have asked a really nice and tricky question, and they said, would you say ageism is a bigger problem for younger or older workers? I don't know who would like to reply. Maybe Stefan, would you like to reply to the question?
So although I think it's more something maybe for Maria and Federica, I will try to have a brief suggestion. I think that there is no general answer like on the prevalence. So the research that investigates ageism against older and younger people at least shows that there are big country differences. So in some countries, it seems that especially younger people are affected by age discrimination and ageism, while in other countries, it's especially older people. I'm not sure if there's clear evidence for the reasons of this disparity, because this is even the case for Europe. However, I think that it depends on the overall social circumstances. So we have seen, for example, I know it for Austria, that the jobs of older persons are more safe during the crisis, while younger people find it more difficult to find a job. However, before the COVID crisis, it was especially older people that had problems of finding a job. So I think there is no overall answer to that, but this is also why it's a good question. But maybe Maria and Federica want to add more to that.
I would add that ageism, disregarding the age group to which it's forwarded, is the biggest problem in the labor market. It also concerns younger and older, and indeed several studies show that ageism towards the younger cohorts is even more widespread than towards the older cohorts due to their self-evaluation. But in general, that's the industry, that's the labor market, and the whole society which is suffering. So we are not speaking about older workers, although the majority of examples in this webinar were about them. It's just a general problem which should be solved with quite universal tools. And we should aim it and not to think who is suffering more.
Thank you. We also have another question about COVID, and I find that really an actually question, and it says like, could you provide some information on how COVID has impacted ageism in the labor market? Who would like to raise that question?
I can start, and perhaps Federica can follow. Ageism, in fact, did not bring anything really new. It just exacerbated all the problems that we had. And from that perspective, we can say that COVID and the containment measures following it actually opened the window of opportunities for us to build awareness about what was going on and what is going on, and in some way to build back better and to change the system which was long implicit in the labor market. Firstly, it concerns the stereotypes and the switch to teleworking, as all the people were regarded as unable or less able, less quickly able to switch to new technologies, to learn new stuff, and to able to produce in the new reality, to be flexible to changes. But it also concerns the vulnerability context in which they were described in the media, in the policy documents. And in fact, these lockdown, exit, and return to work strategies in the majority of cases were really preventing older people from participating in the labor market, because some of them were still involved, and the cocooning recommendations and other lockdown regulations really prevented them to continue their meaningful participation. Federica?
Well, yeah, I think Maria gave a lot of information already. I think I can just add also, touching upon the previous question about whether it's about older or younger people. Also in the latest data on COVID-19 and working life, we see that actually younger workers have like higher exhaustion of like emotional resources or like quantitative resources. So actually they were impacted more by the lockdown and by the remote working, probably against our stereotypes that like older workers would have suffered more by this distance working and approaching technology. So also here we can see that it's really across all ages, and it's also a sum. So it's not just age, it's like also where you work, how is your household, and of course, which type of work you do, because many businesses have shut down, but especially younger workers are employed in like this type of sectors that have been mostly affected by ageism, so services and restaurants, for example. So it's of course very spread and coverates a lot.
Thank you very much, both of you. I think that we have time for answering the last two questions that we have. One is about a legal framework. It's like they are asking, could you provide some information on the legal protection framework against age discrimination in the UK or in the EU? I don't know who would like to address this question.
Yes, I can talk a little bit about that, although I don't know the UK case, but I am familiar with the EU legislation. So there is the so-called Employment Directive, which was issued in around 2003, if I remember correctly, and it includes different reasons or different grounds like religion, disability, sexual orientation, but also age as a prohibited ground for discrimination with relation to employment and occupation. There are different areas that are covered, for example, the conditions of access to employment or self-employed activities, on-job and vocational training is included, then also payment, making reasonable changes to the workplace and these kind of things. But even like the membership to organizations of employers is included and protected under this so-called employment directive. However, one has to acknowledge the fact that there are also some exemptions that allow EU member states in certain cases to apply differential treatment. For example, if it is reasonable in relation to the labor market and to increase youth employment, for example, then there can be measures taken for differential treatment based on age. Overall, one has to acknowledge the fact that the employment directive had a major impact on age discrimination, especially after 2004, 2005. A lot of cases have been taken to the European Court of Justice in relation to age discrimination, even some very important cases that have led to the acknowledgement of age discrimination as one principal ground in EU equality law. So this is kind of a brief summary, I guess. One last statement on that. One major issue is that while age discrimination is prohibited in relation to employment, it is not prohibited in relation to the access to services and goods. And I think this is a major shortcoming, and this is something we have to work on in the future.
And I really thank you for your answer. But I think that this kind of bell is not for going to the opera, it's just for making us aware that our time is over. I would really like to thank Robert Gordon University for this opportunity, my four lovely colleagues for this incredible presentation, and for each of you who are there and who have shown interest in ageism in the workforce and in the industry. EuroAgeism is running another 3 other webinars also about ageism in the healthcare, also in the mass media and in the technology. If you go to our website, euroageism.eu, you can find all the information, and we really hope that you can apply or at least take back to your workplaces some of the key ideas that we have shared with you. Please feel free to contact us at any time. And being able to work is a human right, nowhere the age of a person. Thank you very much for being with us today. And lovely day. Thank you.